Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargav, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we talk about a new cashless digital payments medium launched by the government. We also talk about a new crisis that poultry farmers are facing. But first, we talk about Lavlina Borgohain. Yesterday at the Tokyo Olympics, Lavlina Borgohain made history when she won the bronze medal after participating in the 69 kg boxing semi-finals. This was India's first Olympic medal in boxing in 9 years, and only the third overall after Vijender Singh in 2008 and Mary Kom in 2012. The 23-year-old Lavlina won the bronze after losing 5-0 to the reigning world champion Busaina Surmaneli of Turkey. Even though her win was historic, yesterday after the match, she was quoted saying that she was a bit disappointed because she had worked really hard for a gold medal. In this segment, Gaurav Bhatt, the host of the Express Sports podcast and who has been tracking Lavlina's career since the beginning, joins us to talk about her performance and what it means for her. We had this conversation a few hours after her bout got over. So Gaurav, before we talk about Lavlina's performance in the Olympics, could you talk about what were the expectations that people had from her going in, especially considering that she was being talked about as a bit of an underdog, right?
So the boxing contingent in Tokyo, first of all, was India's biggest ever. And the two smallest boxers in the team were the biggest hopes for the medal, the flyweights Amit Pangal and Mary Kom. They were slated to reach at least the semi-final and assure the nation of a medal, though it didn't turn out that way. The outside chances were handed to people like, say, the three-time Olympian Vikas Krishan and Manish Kaushik, whom I've always considered the most technically proficient boxer in the country. Lavlina Borgohain, though, also stood a chance, even though she was an underdog, like you just mentioned. It was the sheer consistency of her performances over the last 3-4 years that made her a contender. And now, mind you, this 69 kg women's field was an absolute minefield littered with the world champions, world championship runners up, continental champions, prior Olympic medalists. So it was never going to be easy for her, but you could always back Lavlina to string together a performance or two, especially because she had been given a bye in the first round. So she had to fight that one bout less to make it to the medal rounds.
And the other thing is that this past year has been tough for her, right? I mean, she had to return home to her mom who had been ill. Plus, during that time, she contracted COVID. How much did that affect her training and preparations?
A whole lot. So it affected the training preparations in the sense that crunch period, where a boxer, where any athlete, but a boxer especially, they need to get in the ring time, they need to iron away any weaknesses or deficiencies in their technique. That was the period that she first spent in Badumukhia. That's her village where she was taking care of her mother. She wasn't there by her side when her mother underwent the kidney transplant, and she wasn't doing too well. So Lavlina went back to the village, took care of her mother, and during that period, she contracted COVID. Now, anyway, this team has lost all momentum from the great 2018 and 2019 season, where they were getting medals at the World Championships and strong performances at the Olympic qualifiers. They had lost that 1 year, like everybody else did. But Lavlina contracting COVID meant that she missed out on 50 odd days of training in Italy, an invitational tournament in Europe. And this came at a period when anyway the tournaments were hard to come by because there were so many restrictions on travel. There had to be so many arrangements to be made. So for Lavlina to not just miss those events, that training, but also to recover from having contracted COVID, yeah, we can say it wasn't the ideal preparation for Tokyo.
Yeah, that definitely appears to be a crucial period lost. But despite that, of course, she has made history. She did win a bronze medal. So let's talk about her performance at the Olympics this time. I mean, one major bout that she had was against the Chinese Taipei boxer Chen Yanqin, and this was the quarterfinals. And winning this had basically assured her the bronze medal. So talk about this bout. What stood out for you in it? I mean, this is a boxer that Lavlina had faced previously as well. What was different this time?
So if there were a medal for getting your fair share of revenge, Lavlina Borgohain would have won it when she defeated Lian Chinchen of Chinese Taipei, because this was a boxer who had defeated Lavlina 4 times before. Never had Lavlina defeated her. In New Delhi at the 2018 World Championships, I was there watching from the stands when Lavlina was completely outsmarted by Chen, and she had no answer. So that was a defeat in the semifinals. Afterwards, she tinkered, she recalibrated her technique, her skills, but even then she came up short against Nian Shinchen. So the question on everybody's mind was, what changed? What exactly happened that Lavlina was able to not just defeat, not just exact that revenge, but to defeat her very handily with a 4-1 win? When we asked what changed, the brilliant part was that she said she went in with no strategy whatsoever, because she had devised 4 different strategies before, and all 4 had failed. So this time she went in blank. She went in with this I'll see it on the fly attitude. And she was absolutely wonderful. And again, we should not chalk this up to her being lucky on the day, or Chen not being in her good form. What happened was, in the bout previously against the German veteran, Lavlina was able to use her height and her reach advantage, and she would jab away, she would double jab away, she would keep the distance. And against Shen Yen Chen, she did that. Plus, she also started following up her jabs with the right crosses. I know I'm being very technical here, but let's just say she added another shot, another strike to her repertoire, to her armory, and suddenly she was able to unnerve this Chinese Taipei favorite. And she very handily defeated her. So that sort of a performance, it's one thing to assure the nation of a medal, to secure a medal yourself, but doing so with a performance like that against somebody who has been your nemesis for so many years, it was just the cherry on top of this Sunday.
And Gaurav, something that you have talked about even on the Express Sports podcast, which you host, is Lavlina's temperament. How did that reflect in this particular match?
So when we talked about that 2018 World Championship loss to Nianshin Chen, we need to remember that it was in front of her family, in front of the home crowd, and being in the spotlight squarely, that made it that much tougher for Lavlina to reach the final. Then afterwards, she openly admitted that composure is a thing that she is lacking, that sort of self-belief, it shakes a little when we get into those crucial rounds, into those crucial few seconds where a round is ending, you are behind and you have to cover up, or even if you are leading and you just need to keep leading, her self-belief would shake and then she would give away the round. The temperament part was lacking. She worked on it a lot, and things ranging from just writing down her day in the minutest details possible in her diary every night, her targets, her goals, to even meditation. She went gung ho into meditation. She started focusing on the opponent ahead. She started doing a lot of homework. But Shashank, the funny part here is, and she herself mentioned that the composure bit is taken care of now. She's not fearful like she used to be. She is very much fearless. But the best part is she has done away with all the meditation. She hasn't written in that diary for quite some time, because I think she has reached that point where she realizes that whatever happens in the ring is the key part. And that is where her self-belief stems from.
Okay, so now let's talk about her last match, which was the semi-finals and which was against the world champion Busena Surmanelli. I mean, we know that she lost, but how did she fare against her?
Do we need to? Because having talked about the composure bit, the skills that she has acquired in the last couple of years, the semi-final was an absolute shutout. Busina Surmaneli from the Turkey was the top seed, and she showed that she's a boxer who is multiple notches above Lavlina. Now, this might sound a little foolish, and I'll try and explain why. The 5-0 scoreline that Lavlina was subjected to, it was a unanimous defeat. 3 judges scored the last round 10-8. Now 10-8 is a round which judges think that a boxer has clearly lost, and Lavlina was adjudged the loser in those rounds. So it would be absurd to suggest that the decision didn't accurately reflect the one-sidedness of the bout. But in this battle of two 23-year-old fighters who have a swagger about them, who showboat a little, it was Lavlina actually who drew the first blood. The bout began with a little bit of phone booth boxing. Now, for our listeners, phone booth boxing is when two boxers, they are up against each other, they are in each other's faces, their heads are pushed up together, and they're just slugging it out. So Lavlina was tasked to take on an opponent who doesn't have a reverse gear. She kept advancing, and for some time, Lavlina tried holding her, pushing her, shoving her. It was bad optics in terms of judging the bout because she was being seen as somebody who's employing dirty boxing, but she was trying her best to disturb Surmanali's rhythm a little. So that worked for some time, but like Mike Tyson famously said, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And that's what happened in the last 30 seconds of the first round. Surmanali caught Lavlina with a brilliant left hook that just rattled the Indian, broke all the confidence that she had gained over the first 2.5 minutes. And after that, it was absolutely one way traffic. It was Surmanali's power against Lavlina's distance boxing, which didn't work out for the Indian, unfortunately, on the day.
Right, and even despite that, just her winning that bronze medal is historic and is a big deal. But how much was that gold medal on her mind going into the Olympics?
So right now, as we speak, Lavlina is sulking. She's very angry. She's not at all happy about the bronze medal that she secured because we need to remember that this is a boxer who has won bronze at every major competition, but never a silver or a gold. And I'm talking about a major competition where other accomplished boxers from other countries took part. This was the moment for her to make it past that final hurdle and to reach the final, and she said so even after her quarterfinal win. When we had a conversation, she basically maintained that there's only one medal, and that is gold. So she was not at all content or complacent after having won the bronze medal, and she wanted to go for gold. This one is going to sting, especially because, like I said, her trophy cabinet is missing that sheen of a great gold medal from a great tournament, and this would have been it. But yeah, from what I have seen and from the trajectory that I've followed, Lavlina is a boxer who has always built upon the bronze medals. We can say that this is the fifth bronze medal in a row for the boxer. Does she have it in her to make it to the final? But she is a boxer who builds upon those performances and who bounces back. So maybe, yeah, Paris is only 3 years away, and this one is only going to get stronger.
And just for our listeners, Lavlina in the past has won 2 bronze medals in the World Championships and 2 bronze medals in the Asian Championships. But Gaurav, just winning an Olympic medal and even just getting this kind of recognition, what does it do for someone like her who we know comes from a very humble background and whose family we know has struggled financially in the past?
As we speak, videos are going viral of construction work underway on the road to her residence in the Golaghat district, Badumukhia village. We have seen billboards coming up. Albeit Lavlina's face wasn't really the prominent one in those billboards, but that's neither here nor there. Several murals have been painted on the walls. But to answer the question, Shashank, it's a strange dichotomy when it comes to questions like that because our female Olympians have been pulling all the weight. They've been getting us medals for some time now, and we have been fawning over their techniques, their temperaments. Then talking about the backstories, the quote unquote human angle of their success story, sometimes it can be very jarring because the discourse has moved on from their struggles to their exploits in the ring or on the court. But yes, in this case, it's a pertinent angle. Her father used to do small jobs which got him 1,500, 2,000 rupees a month. And the other villagers would always pass comments telling her parents that you have no sons, you have only daughters, the pearl clutching taunts that they all wear jeans. Licha and Lima, Lavlina's elder sisters, they are accomplished athletes in their own right. They practiced Muay Thai, the martial art, and they got government jobs. And Lavlina has been a trailblazer in boxing. But we also need to remember that Lavlina had to spend all her Arjuna Award prize money that she received last year in taking care of her mother in the aforementioned kidney transplant. So, of course, the financial help that comes along the way now will be very crucial. There's also a question about legacy. And without even being hyperbolic, we can chart what sort of legacy these bronze medalist boxers have had on the country. Now, Haryana has always had several boxers. Hawa Singh was a two-time Asian Games gold medalist, but it took Vijender Singh in 2008 to get the bronze and to put Bhiwani on the map. Now Bhiwani is known as the Cuba of India. It has the Bhiwani Boxing Club, which has produced several great boxers like Manish Kaushik and others. Mary Kom had won 5 gold medals. She had been the world champion 5 times even prior to taking the ring in 2012 at the inaugural women's event at the Olympics. Contemporary Sarita Devi was also wildly successful. But it took Mary's bronze in London to kickstart the revolution in the Northeast. And Assam has had boxers before. Shiva Thapa is a 3 time Olympian. There are boxers like Bhagavati Kasari and Jamuna Boro who are also very talented. They are contemporaries to Lavlina. But we can't even begin to imagine the effect Lavlina's bronze is going to have. And at least for a while now, all roads will be leading to the Borgohain household.
This was Gaurav Bhatt. You can listen to him and his co-host Mihir Vasavda on the Express Sports podcast. Right now they have a daily Olympic series going on called Pod of the Rings, episodes for which come out every morning at 7:30. Do check them out. And next we talk about e-rupee. On Monday, Prime Minister Narendra Modi launched a new digital payment system called e-rupee. This is a cashless and contactless payment medium that will work along the lines of a gift voucher. In this segment, Indian Express's Pranav Mukul joins us to talk about exactly how it will work and how it is expected to benefit people. So Pranav, could you first explain what exactly is e-rupee and how is it supposed to work?
So e-rupee, and here rupee spelled RUPI for the UPI payment system that we have, because it's based on that. It's essentially a contactless, cardless, cashless digital payment system. And it's essentially supposed to work like a gift voucher does for various e-commerce websites that we use. So when someone, for example, gives you a gift voucher for an e-commerce company, only you can use it once you've loaded it into your wallet, and you can only use it on that website. So in that sense, e-rupee also is a very person specific and purpose specific payment system that will be issued to whoever is being given certain subsidies or any other monetary benefits to use for a specific purpose.
Okay, so for us to understand this better, could you root this in an example?
So one example where it is actually being used now, or at least what the government intends to do is, for example, if there are any companies that are wanting to have their staffers vaccinated at private clinics where currently, vaccines are chargeable. So instead of giving them the cash to pay at the private vaccine center or getting into an arrangement with the private vaccine center, they can simply have this voucher or e-rupee issued to their employees, who can then send that voucher to the vaccine center. So that payment will be made only for that purpose and only by the person who it is issued to.
Right. So let's say if you get that voucher, you can't then forward it to me and then I can't go and use it.
No. So how this works is that, for example, if our company wants to do something like this, then they'll get in touch with a bank, one of the partner banks that is issuing e-rupee, and they will tell them that I want to issue, for example, say 300 vouchers for this particular purpose, and it will give these banks our mobile numbers. And so these vouchers would then, of a particular value, will be delivered to our mobile numbers through an SMS string or a QR code. And at the centers which are accepting e-rupee, this SMS code or the QR code will be then used to transfer that e-rupee. So how it works in a wallet kind of situation. Then that e-rupee voucher will be transferred to the receiving parties. So in this case, the vaccination center. But once that voucher has been issued to me, then only I can use it for only this purpose. So if that voucher has been issued to me for getting myself vaccinated, then I can't use that voucher to buy groceries or something else, or I can't transfer it to some of my colleague or something like that.
And in what situations does the government think it will be the most useful?
So right now they're trying to use it as part of the National Digital Health Mission, where they want to provide benefits to certain sections of the society by providing these vouchers that can be used to make payments for various health services, including vaccination or various other kinds of subsidies that are given or various other kinds of charity benefits that are made. If someone is ailing from some disease and they need to be provided a food voucher, so instead of making a cash payment or a payment in their bank accounts, which might be slightly more difficult for them to operate, this is a much more simple way to do that. Beyond this, the government is saying that this can be extended to various other sectors, including education, including like fertilizer subsidies or food subsidies and so on. And even the private sector can make use of it for either their CSR purposes, if they want to. What the Prime Minister said in his speech yesterday, if a private company wants to, for example, have a bunch of people vaccinated at their cost, then they can just have these vouchers issued to them that can be used at private clinics.
Okay, so one aspect of this is banks issuing these vouchers, and the other aspect of this is different places, including private ones, accepting this medium of payment. So do we think that places will accept this readily, or do we sense that there might be some hesitation?
So that's something that will have to be seen as to how many places. So right now it's just being focused on making the direct benefit transfer system more leak proof. But as we go ahead, and if this is meant to be used as a commercial mode of payment, then of course we'll need a lot of places to be accepting this, because it's still backed by the Indian rupee. The underlying asset is still the Indian rupee. It's just a voucher that is being created for a very specific purpose. Also, what global examples suggest is that these kind of vouchers, they mostly remain limited to state-funded benefits that are being provided to people. So, for example, in the US, there's this whole school voucher system where certain vouchers that were carrying a certain denomination were issued to parents of children who wanted their children to be in private schools or public schools. So, government would issue these vouchers, and then parents would redeem those vouchers to pay the fees for their children's education. So it's mostly in state-funded activities that these vouchers seem to be working globally as well. But obviously, we'll have to see whether in India there's a plan to make this mode of payment commercial or not.
And in the end, we talk about poultry farmers. For nearly a year and a half, the poultry industry has been dealing with one crisis after the other. First, it was COVID-19. Then came avian influenza, also called bird flu. But now it's something entirely new. To understand exactly what this is, we speak to Parthasarathi Biswas, who writes on agriculture for the Indian Express. And he starts by talking about the previous two crises first.
It started with COVID in 2020, and they were completely unfounded rumors which had linked COVID with chicken and eggs, which saw sales really hitting rock bottom. Then you had avian influenza in most part of the countries towards the end of 2020 and beginning of 2021. And now you have something as basic as the price of raw material. Now, it might sound odd, but the poultry industry has an umbilical relation with the soya bean. Now, soya bean as an oilseed does not interest them. It is the solid which is left after the oil is explained from the seed. It's a blackish protein-rich material, and it goes by the name of soya cake or de-oiled soya cake.
Now, this soya cake forms the protein part of the diet that is fed to the poultry animals.
Like any living organism, protein is the building block of the body. So from a 1-day-old chick to a 45-day-old chicken, it requires a certain diet which would include protein, carbohydrates, vitamins, minerals, and trace metals. Now, the protein for poultry comes from this DOC, de-oiled soya cake. De-oiled soya cake is the only protein which the birds can absorb easily. And along with DOC, the feed industry uses formulations which includes rice or jowar as the carbohydrate or energy source. And you have a range of vitamins like any living being who requires, which is added to the whole mixture. So the poultry farmers feed their birds almost like 200 grams per day. And in a span of 45 days, that is the time that is taken for a 1-day-old chick, which weighs between 35 grams to 40 grams, to attain the market-ready weight of 2 to 2.5 kgs. They require around 4 to 4.5 kgs of such feed.
Okay, so just to recap, the feed that farmers give to poultry animals, the protein part of it, comes from the de-oiled soya bean cake, also called DOC. And Partha says the problem is that since the beginning of 2021, the prices of soya bean have skyrocketed.
There is a variety of reasons. The reasons are all international. There has been a dip in soya production in international markets. The fields of Brazil had drought. Argentina, Brazil, United States, they are major growers of soya. But that is genetically modified soya. But as you know, the commodity market is always influenced by international forces. Soybean prices in India have seen a lot of appreciation. So bean has the new bean which was harvested in October 2020, has barely traded below its government declared minimum support price. Soybean farmers have made good money, and at present, soybean prices in markets of Indore, Latur, in Maharashtra are as high as 10,000 rupees per quintal, which in normal times would hover somewhere around 5,000 or 6,000. That too, the industry says is high.
This is why the price of DOC, which you need to feed to poultry animals, has gone up. DOC normally sells at 43 rupees per kg, but right now it is selling at around 107 rupees per kg. This is why the overall feed prices have gone up as well.
In normal times, feed prices would be around 35 to 36 rupees a kg. At present, it's around 50 rupees a kg. So because of this, many small farmers are not able to match their mathematics. We need to understand their order books. We need to understand their balance sheets have taken two huge hits, once in 2020 and another in the beginning of 2021. Now, with input costs rising, they will not be able to absorb the loss. Yes, in retail market, the prices have gone. Farm gate also prices have gone, but then it is not enough. So at this moment, the realization, that is the farm gate price which a poultry farmer would be selling their market ready birds, is around 110 rupees per kg, while its cost of production is around 96, 97 rupees a kg. So just a margin of 3 rupees is not enough to help them in their balance sheets. And there is a huge dearth of de-oiled soya cake, because the millers who expel the oil and make the soya cake, they themselves are not getting enough soya bean. Many small integrators or poultry players have just exited the market. And this is one of the reasons why the industry at present is going through a crisis in raw material. Yes, the realization is not bad, but the cost of production is so high that they are not able to match with it. So at this moment, they are all in red. And many of them are thinking of cutting down on production and ensuring that they would wait for some time before they again start their cycle.
So, Parthasarathi, you mentioned that soya bean cake is something that poultry animals like chickens, for example, can readily have. Is there any alternative that could be fed to them instead?
Not really. Now, every oil seed, once the oil is expelled from the seed, would give this protein-rich material with a de-oiled cake that we call it in our feed industry. So you have de-oiled cake from cotton, you have de-oiled cake from groundnut, you would have it from mustard, you would have it from anything and everything which is an oil seed. However, if you look at the physiology and the digestive tract of a chicken, the chicken would not be able to digest the heavier de-oiled cakes of, say, cotton, groundnut, mustard, or anything. They can replace the carbohydrate with mostly they use maize. But in case maize prices are high and jowar prices are less, they can replace maize with jowar. However, when it comes to protein, they cannot replace it with anything else. In bigger animals like bovine, they mostly use de-oiled cake of cotton seed. But in birds like chicken, they cannot do that. The birds will not be able to absorb it, and they will neither gain their body weight nor will they be able to survive. Mortality in birds because of replacement of soya cake is very high. So the industry has got its limitation in terms of replacing soya cake.
You were listening to Three Things by The Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargav, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.